down in quarantine. But I started to think, I was thinking last night about the class today, and I went back to when I left my home in 1971 and joined the temple. So the first place that I wound up moving into a temple was New Vrindavan. And if anyone knows the history of New Vrindavan, of course, we're going back to 1968, 1969. So when I joined is 1971. And it was at the Bahulaban farm. So of course, New Vrindavan was West Virginia. It's the country, it's rural. The Bahulaban farm, it was just that. It was a farmhouse, had no running water in the house, had a well outside, no bathroom in the house. That was also outside. Everything was outside. So it was very rustic, very austere, we would say, by American standards. And the farm itself was about 5 miles or more from what was the main road, which was just a 2-lane highway there at New Vrindavan. So even when I joined that temple, we basically were quarantined. We were just like here now. I'm staying at MVT property in Vrindavan. So we have about 5 acres or so where we can roam around in here, maybe less than that, maybe 3 acres or so, that with inside this compound where the gate's locked and we get to go out our front door, we walk around, we chant japa. We can see maybe there's 25 devotees or so staying here at this time. So in New Vrindavan, at the farm I was at, there was just a dozen of us. Have a vehicle there. There was a farm truck that was used between the different farms. So there was no question of going anywhere. During the day, we were all very busy, and it came in New Vrindavan. Even Srila Prabhupada, he would call them the inmates of New Vrindavan. If you see some of the letters where Prabhupada speaks about the devotees, he very often used the term the inmates of New Vrindavan. And it was more than just an expression. We were literally on that farm. The only time you could even think of leaving was in the middle of the night, which meant you had to walk down this very dark road with no lights in the middle of the night to get to the highway, and then hope that perhaps you could get picked up by someone. So in a sense, we were quarantined. But really what I wanted to talk about is when I became Prabhupada's servant. And I was with him for 2.5 years. And that was right from coming to New Vrindavan. I became Prabhupada's personal servant just after Janmashtami, 1972. So in a sense, you would think, well, Prabhupada was traveling all around the world, which he did 14 times in 10 years. But at the same time, Prabhupada had a very regulated schedule. And he was in his room all day, literally all day and all night. He was in his room. The only time he left his room was for his morning walk. And that was just about 6 o'clock in the morning. So the walk was about 1 hour. And then right from the morning walk, of course, he would go into the temple room. And you would stay in the temple room. He would give class, have the deity greeting, Guru Puja. So that was another hour. So outside of that, those 2 hours, Prabhupada was in his room.
Hare Krishna.
I think internet issues. Yes.
I think the light went off. I think Prabhuji dropped because of.
He's coming.
Oh, he's coming.
म्यूट किया हुआ है प्रभु जी उनको.
You gotta say that you have so many different places here.
Are we reconnected?
Yes, Prabhu
Yes,
ji.
Prabhuji.
Okay. So what was the last thing you heard?
You were locked inside the temple. Prabhupada was calling inmates.
So, in Vrindavan, and then 1 hour for the arti,
Yes. He
give
would
the
go, of
class.
course,
Yes.
on his morning walk for 1 hour and then go in the temple room where he would give class, Guru Puja, greeting the deities was 1 hour. And then he would be back in his room. So that meant as his personal servant, you were in your room. Now, the way Prabhupada communicated to call his servant, we know was very simple. He just rang a bell. And it was literally just a little brass bell. In fact, I would carry that bell from place to place. It would go in his white bag. So in order to hear that bell, you could only be 50 feet away, 60 feet away at the most. So for the whole time I traveled with Srila Prabhupada, I was in that room. I was 21, 22-year-old boy who just joined the temple, who was literally in a quarantine situation. So, of course, and Prabhupada, he was following that same schedule. He was in his room, and he followed what he called routine. Prabhupada talks about, if you read in his books, you'll see sometimes he talks about the routine program. Once in our travels, Prabhupada went to Australia. He had not been feeling well. This was 1975. So he traveled to Australia with myself, his secretary, and there were only 2 other devotees, Australian devotees. And we stayed in Perth, Australia, which was a beach town on the west coast of Australia. So it was summertime in Perth at that time. And one of the devotees who was staying there, his parents, they owned this cottage, this vacation cottage, holiday cottage. So they had Prabhupada stay there. So it was just Srila Prabhupada, myself, the secretary, and these 2 young brahmacharis were all staying there. So we arrived there in the afternoon, and the night came and the next morning came. So it's about 6 o'clock in the morning. And Srila Prabhupada, he rang his bell. So I go in the room and he told me, he said, call Amoga. Amoga, he was my god brother. He was the one who had made this arrangement for Prabhupada to stay there. So I went and got Amoga, and we both went back into Prabhupada's room. And Prabhupada looked at Amoga and he said, so what's the program? So of course, this word program, Amoga was trying to understand what he meant. And he said, well, while you're here, I'm trying to arrange for some people to come, take your darshan, you could speak with, you can preach to, perhaps college professor, high school professor like that, high school teacher. And Prabhupada looked at him again and he said, but what is the program? And Amoga, he was like perplexed. And he said, well, Prabhupada, what do you mean? What program? He said, I'm trying to arrange programs. And he said, no, the program. He said, we're all staying here in this house. He said, so what is our program? He said, we have Mangal Arti, we have class. He said, these things have to go on. He said, this is the program. He said, this is the routine. Because we were staying in this house, which there was no temple there in Perth at the time, there were no other devotees there. We just basically thought we were like on a little holiday there. But for Prabhupada, it didn't matter. Wherever he went, we had a program. We had this, he called it the routine. And he would always stress this routine, how important it was to follow the routine program, which of course we know meant rising early in the morning, taking bath, attending Mangalartik, chanting the rounds, Guru Puja, class. Prabhupada called this the program, the routine program. And he said, by following this program, he said, then everything you do, it will be successful. He said, there'll be no difficulty. But if we don't follow this program, he said, then there'll be difficulties. So even though we were basically somewhere, no temple, no devotees, he wanted that we still followed the morning program. I remember on my very first trip to Mayapur with Srila Prabhupada, that was in early 1973. So he had stayed in Calcutta for one day, and the next morning now he was going to go see Mayapur. At that time there was nothing there. The only building there at that time was what now is the only rooms they had there was Prabhupada's rooms, his very first room, which was just that thatched hut where Prabhupada stayed. But he was traveling there. And we left early in the morning, about 4:30 in the morning in the car. It was about a 4-hour Hare Krishna Kuladri. It was about a 4-hour drive. And halfway there, Prabhupada stopped. He stopped at what later on will become a very famous tirtha, the mango grove, which is about halfway to Mayapur, what was on the main road at that time. So as soon as we got there, there was just 4 of us, just one carload. And when we got there, we sat down, Prabhupada sat down. We had prasadam, breakfast prasadam, but when we sat down, he looked at me and he said, so you can lead. He said, Mangalartik prayers. So this was the first time I ever chanted before Prabhupada, but as soon as we were there, he wanted a morning program. He wanted us to do this routine. So this was always there with Srila Prabhupada. He was very regulated. In a sense, like I say, it was wherever we were, it was like being quarantined, at least for someone like me. We traveled around the world to so many places, but all I ever saw was the temple room, Srila Prabhupada's room, and wherever the morning walk would be, which was usually in some park somewhere. We could go to Paris, but of course I didn't see the Eiffel Tower, although we did walk by the Eiffel Tower one day. So we were never tourists. Prabhupada had his program, he had his routine, and everything revolved around keeping healthy, keeping fit, and doing the spiritual practices. Our morning walk, of course, was about getting our rounds chanted. With myself, he expressed himself that you chant your rounds, he said, on the morning walk. So even he was speaking, sometimes I'm holding the microphone. He considered that when we were on the walk, we could get our rounds chanted, we got our morning exercise, and then go back to the room. So sometimes that was a little difficult. This morning, I had started to tell the story to the Russian devotees, how, what was I saying? To the Russian devotees, huh?
You were telling Russian devotees how you were, it was same thing like being quarantined,
So anyway, as we were going out in the morning, so I stayed in Los Angeles. It was Prabhupada stayed there for 6 weeks. So sometimes the devotees, they would come to the bottom of the stairs of Prabhupada's quarters, and they would try to get my attention so I could tell them something, what Srila Prabhupada was doing. So I got to know them, some of the young men there, like myself. We were all just about 20, 21 years old. And they said to me, come to Mangalartik. This was New Dwarka, Rukmini Dwarkadish, very beautiful deities. The temple room, New Dwarka Temple, 1973, there was over 100 devotees there. Grihastas, the artist department was there, the painters were there, BBT was there. So there were many devotees there. So they kept saying, come to Mongol Artik. Now, I had never been told I could or couldn't do anything. I was just expected to answer the bell. But I had an understanding that I always had to be in that room, because if Prabhupada rang his bell, you had to be able to hear it. So that was a short leash for his servant. Anyway, after a few days, they convinced me. They said, does Prabhupada ever call you so early in the morning? And I said, no. I said, never before 5:30 or so. Generally, everything was prepared for him. Prabhupada, he would brush his teeth in the morning, around 5 in the morning, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, with his datung. Datung was the twig. And depending on where we were, if we were in India, of course, you would get a neem twig or a mango twig like that. If in Australia, we could get eucalyptus twig. Same thing in Los Angeles, you could find eucalyptus tree. So that was also antiseptic. And it would be about the size of a pencil. So this twig, this was Prabhupada's toothbrush. He didn't use plastic, nonsense, dirty toothbrush. He used this datung. And as we traveled, sometimes if he went through his room, he would go through my room to go to the bathroom. So if he didn't think things were set up, that would be the only word I would hear. He didn't say full sentences. He would just walk by and say datung, which meant, do you have the datung in the bathroom? Is my toothbrush there? So of course, it generally always was there. So then he would get that toothbrush, the twig, and he would just chew on the end and it would become bristly. So with those bristles, that's how he brushed his teeth each morning. And then after he was done doing that part, then he would just take it and snap it. And then that became the tongue cleaner. And there was no copper, stainless steel, not even silver tongue cleaner. The tongue cleaner was changed every day, just like his toothbrush was changed every day. So that was my only real service in the morning, was to see that that was there. So finally, they convinced me that I should come to Mongol Artik and hear the nice devotees chanting samsara prayers. And I like kirtan, so the idea was something I liked. So of course, the next morning I went to Mongol Artik at 4:30 in the morning. And I'm in the temple room. This was the old temple room in Los Angeles, Watsika Avenue. So after being there for 10 minutes or so, of course, I get a tap on the shoulder. And it was, I heard that sentence that I heard many times being with Prabhupada. And this time it was Prajumna, Prabhupada's Sanskrit editor. And he tapped me from behind. I turned around and he looked at me. Prabhupada wants to see you and he's really mad. So this was a very common expression we would hear amongst ourselves when Prabhupada asked to see one of his entourage about something they had done or didn't do. So of course I ran out of the temple room, offered my obeisances, ran up the stairs, and I'm offering my obeisances. And again, like happened so many times, as I'm offering my obeisances, he's already yelling at me. He said, "Where have you been? I've been ringing this bell for hours." So of course I sat up, and you never have a good reason. You never have a good excuse when Srila Prabhupada would chastise you. That much I knew. But amongst excuses, amongst reasons, I thought this one was decent. And I just said, well, Prabhupada, I went to Mongol Artik this morning. And he just looked at me. He said, you have no business going to Mongol Artik. He said, your service, he says, is to be in that room 24 hours a day. He said, what if I need something? He said, I have to call you. He said, you have to be there. He said, you have no business going to Mongol Artik. So that was personal servant. That was quarantined. I was literally quarantined to that room. I never left that room again after that to do anything And it was rightfully so, because Prabhupada rang that bell. There was no one, like in Los Angeles, I was the only person upstairs in Prabhupada's flat in the back room, which was the servants' quarters. So this was Krishna consciousness for me. As I said, from what Prabhupada told us about the routine, the program, I was the only person. I was in Maya because I went to Mongol Arti. We say everyone else were in Maya because we don't go to Mongol Arti, because that's the program. But the program is also, it's personal. Our service is always personal. Even in these times, Prabhupada showed all of us how to live very simply and practice Krishna consciousness. Again, he would, after class in the morning, he had his breakfast. After breakfast, he would have some meetings, sometimes with his secretary, the Sanskrit editor. He would, this would run until 11:30 or so, when he would have his massage. So during massage, which was also for his health, to keep his health, he would, very often, secretary would come in and he would read the letters. Prabhupada could get 20, 25 letters a day. So the secretary would read them. Srila Prabhupada would dictate to him. So then after that, of course, he would take bath, put on fresh clothing, sit down, put on his fresh tilak, chant Gayatri mantra. So then he's having lunch around 1 o'clock. So after lunch, half-hour lunch, he would take a short nap. After his nap, afternoon time was very often his personal bhajan time. In the afternoon, in his room and find him reading his books. That was also, to me, was something I found initially the most amazing thing, how Prabhupada would read his books. So 1973, the beginning of 1973, there was first canto, second canto, of course, Nectar, Devotion, Bhagavad Gita, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. These were the books that were there. And Prabhupada would be behind his desk. He would have his reading glasses. The only time you saw Prabhupada with his reading glasses, when he had his books in front of him. And he would be relishing reading his books, sitting in his room. If he wasn't doing that, sometimes he would be walking around. Like in Los Angeles, he could walk around through the flat apartment, through the sitting room, down the hallway, back up the hallway, through the other sitting room, through his bedroom, and he would just make circles and chant his rounds. You could hear him chanting on his beads very softly. Sometimes you would just hear the beads. You wouldn't even hear him speaking, but he would be chanting sometimes. And then, of course, so that time of the day, he would be reading, he would be chanting japa. Sometimes he would do bhajan, play his harmonium, he would chant different Vaishnava songs. And then he would have darshan again later on in the day at different places. He would talk with the different leaders of the temple, find out what was going on, give advice. And then it would just go right back around to the next thing. Sometimes 8 o'clock, he would call me in the evening, tell me what he wanted to eat. And when I was with him, he very often he had a meal in the evening. He would call me in 8 o'clock and tell me to make puris, potato eggplant sabji. Sometimes he would call me in and have me make parathas. Once he asked me, "Do you know how to make paratha?" I said, "No." "Come on, I'll show you." He took me right back to the room, showed me how to make parathas. One evening he came in, he said, "I'll show you how to make potato cabbage, how I like potato cabbage sabji." So this was his lifestyle, very simple. And then, of course, I would give him massage in the evening in his room, in his bedroom, dry massage. That would be from a half hour or more. And then he would take rest, 10:30. 2 hours later, 2.5 hours later, he was up doing his translating work. And the whole time, the servant would be in the servant's quarters, because if he rang his bell, you have to be there. Now remember, in those times, this is 1973, so when you're sitting in the servant's quarters or anywhere, You don't have a phone, you don't have a cell phone, you don't have internet. There's no Instagram, there's no Facebook. None of these things existed. You had your mind, you had your japa beads, and you had Prabhupada's books. This is what you had. So for me, sometimes it created some difficulties. I have to say, being with Prabhupada for 2.5 years, it wasn't always easy for me. I wasn't very philosophical, scholarly. Reading, I didn't read a lot, which Prabhupada knew. So we'll go back to Australia with this program. So now there were just the 4 of us staying with Prabhupada. So he made sure that we had a morning program. He called us into his room. He had us chant the prayers. And then we had class. We had a discussion. So then Australia was very nice place, Australia, very special. If you're familiar with Korma's cookbooks, Korma's cooking classes, you'll see he uses lots of dairy products, ghee, sour cream, paneer. So these were plentiful in Australia. Even they would sell, commercially, you could buy 25 kg tin of ghee, cow ghee in Australia. It was so much ghee in Australia that Prabhupada had muddied visa ghee to India to pay his BBT bill. He would have him, instead of sending money, he had him send it in ghee to India so that the devotees in India, his disciples, they could have cow ghee, because of course getting it here is very difficult. Now even more difficult and very expensive. So that's how much milk product was there. Then of course, for the first time I got to learn, we had sour cream, you had heavy cream, you had clabbered cream, different kinds of cream. And I was of course cooking for Prabhupada, and I would cook for all of us. So I was using a lot of these products. But what happened was at lunchtime, we were eating very rich, and we were eating a good bit. So after 1, 2, 3 days, Prabhupada, he would take his nap after lunch. Prabhupada, he ate very conservatively, little of this, little every day. But we were young, brahmacharis, so we were eating lots of prasadam. And as it happened, we were all staying in the same room, the 4 of us, myself, the secretary, Paramahamsa, Swami, and these 2 local boys, brahmacharis, Australian boys. So after lunch one day, I served Prabhupada, then we had our lunch, and then we all took rest. So Prabhupada, after some time, maybe it was a half hour, I don't even know, but we were all in the other room sleeping very soundly. And eventually I heard a bell ringing, and it's ringing. You could hear Prabhupada was ringing it very briskly, let's say. He was ringing this bell. So finally I heard the bell ringing, and I was in deep sleep, and he woke me up out of my sleep. So I got up, I ran into Prabhupada's room, and I'm offering obeisances. And as I'm offering, I'm trying to get myself together, trying to become a little conscious from the modes of ignorance. And I'm saying my obeisances very slowly. I'm exercising my eyelids so I don't look like I'm in deep sleep when I look up. But for Prabhupada, there was no question of fooling him in any way. So even again, while I'm offering obeisances, he's already yelling. He's there, sleeping. Why is everyone sleeping? He said, all the devotees here sleeping like dead men. So then I sat up, and of course, I didn't venture an excuse by this time. I had been with him long enough to know there are no excuses. So I just looked at him. He said, everyone here, he said, everyone in Australia, they're out working very hard. He says they're working hard to maintain their families. They're working hard for their sex life. He said, but not the devotees. He said, sleeping very nicely. He said, everyone is sleeping very soundly. He said, why is everyone sleeping? And then he just looked, he said, call them. And I thought, oh, Krishna. So I went back to the room, and first was Paramahamsa Swami. I said, Prabhupada wants to see us. He said, he's upset. So then I went to the two boys, and I said, Prabhupada wants to see you. So of course they became very excited that Prabhupada wanted to see them. They thought that was a nice thing. So then we all go into Prabhupada's room together. We offer obeisances, and as soon as we sat up, Prabhupada starts the same thing. Everyone's sleeping, he said, sleeping like dead. He kept calling us dead men. He said, sleeping like dead men, very nicely sleeping. And the same thing, he said, everyone is working, all the karmis, Prabhupada would use that word. He said, all the karmis are working very hard for their sex life. Not the devotees. He said, they're sleeping very nicely. And then he looked at us and he said the worst possible thing. He said, go on, go back to your room, go to sleep, go on, go sleep like dead men. Oh, now we all, our heads are down. He said, go. So we offered obeisances. We went back to the room where we were all sitting just next to Prabhupada's room. But now we're all sitting up. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Of course, there's no question of sleeping at this time. So this went on for a few minutes. And then I hear the bell ring. So I go back into the room, offer obeisances, and I sit up. Prabhupada says, call them back. So I went back to the room, said, Prabhupada wants to see you. So we all go back, we offer obeisances, and now by this time we're all very frightened what's going to happen next. So we offer obeisances and we sit up, and he looks at one of the two boys, and right behind us, there's a bookshelf. It's Prabhupada's room. There's always a bookshelf in Prabhupada's room. So of course, what's on the bookshelf? Prabhupada's books. In every place we went, Prabhupada's room had books, and the only books in Prabhupada's room were Prabhupada's books. So he looks at the devotee. He said, get a book and read. So of course, the standard question, immediately devotee looks at Prabhupada, which book, Prabhupada? Any book. So then he reaches around, he gets a book, gets the book. Now again, he looks at Prabhupada. Where should I read? Anywhere, Prabhupada would say. Just start reading. So then we had a little class. Prabhupada had us pass the book around. This person, we all took turns. Then Prabhupada would speak a little bit of something. So we did this for over half an hour. And then Prabhupada just smiled at us, said, okay, now you could go. But this is what he expected of his disciples, of his followers, in any situation. There wasn't a situation where we should not know that we can do something. We can somehow or other render our devotional service. I say very often, our service is always right in front of us. It's not that we have to come up with a very complicated method of thinking, how can I serve my spiritual master? It's always right there. And if we can't think of anything else, we can always put our hands in the bead bag, chant, or what Prabhupada liked to see very often. If he would see his disciples reading from his books, he would become very pleased, because he knew by reading his books, we would become strong in the philosophy. One place Prabhupada says that the deity worship, he said, if one is performing deity worship, but he's not reading, he said, eventually he'll consider doing that worship a burden. He said, but by reading his books, he'll always understand his service. So it was very important, this reading. So everyone with us here? Connection's good?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. So do we have any questions this evening? And or do you want to do this tomorrow evening again?
Yes, Prabhuji, we have kept the evening free.
Okay.
Yes, Prabhuji.
So could we open this up for questions? We don't want to be too late tonight.
Yes, Prabhuji, I know we get late. Yes.
Thank you everyone for joining. Right now, internet is working nicely, so that's a good thing.
So, devotees, those who have questions can raise the hand or ask. Prabhuji, we wanted to ask about that Prabhupada drinking the Sprite, that how it became such a big thing that the Prabhupada, when he used to like Sprite, drinking Sprite.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, not Sprite. No. 7-Up.
Yes, sorry, 7-Up. Yes, Prabhu.
Not Sprite. No, 7-Up.
Yes.
That was. Okay.
7-Up. Yes.
Okay. Well, the first time I was with Prabhupada when he had a 7-Up, it was on the airplane. So it was in the summertime, maybe July or August, and Prabhupada was traveling from London to New York City. So there's a long flight. So we're on the plane, and Prabhupada, of course, and this was big plane, 747. 747 had 3 seats. In the middle, I think it had 5 seats, and then it had 3 more seats on the other side. They called a wide body. Prabhupada was always in the coach, in economy, not in first class. Once I was on one first class flight with Prabhupada. Anyway, Prabhupada would sit at the window, and I was sitting right next to him, and next to me was his secretary. So about 2 hours into the flight, 3 hours into the flight, the stewardess is pushing down the cart. Now on the cart, she just has the plastic cups. And in the cups, there's 7-Up. And in the other cups, it was Coca-Cola and water like that. So she's going one to the next. So then she stops in front of us. So of course, Prabhupada looks, he said, "What is that?" And when he's talking, he's speaking to me. He's not speaking to the stewardesses. On the airplane, Prabhupada always used his servant as like an interpreter. He didn't speak directly. And when I was with him, he didn't speak directly to them. He would use me as the go-between. So he said, "What is that?" And I look, and you can see even the bubbles on the 7-Up bouncing up from the glass, the fizz. So I said, "Oh, it's 7-Up, Prabhupada." I said, "Would you like 7-Up?" He said, "Okay." So of course, when Prabhupada says okay, that means he gets a 7-Up, I get a 7-Up, secretary gets a 7-Up. So now we're all sitting there, tables are down, 7-Up is there in front of us, and Prabhupada's looking. There's ice in the glass, bubbles are popping up, and Prabhupada just looks. So then he picks up the 7-Up, and you drink 7-Up, those bubbles, it kind of makes almost automatically. So Prabhupada went, and then he looked, he said, "This is very refreshing." So he keeps taking sips. So as soon as he took a sip, of course, then we took our sips, because immediately it became prasadam when Prabhupada took his sip. So now he's drinking the 7-Up, and every time he took a sip, he'd look at me and say, "Very refreshing." So then we finished those 7-Ups. So then another 3 hours go by. And now they're pushing the cart down, and they have all the different cans underneath and the bottles on top. And they come up and they stop in front of us. And I said, "Prabhupada, do you want anything?" He says, "Yes, 7 o'clock. So I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." So now they give us, of course, the glass with the ice and the can. So we open up the can. At those times, the thing would rip right off. The little aluminum top would rip off. Open up the can, pour the 7-Up into Prabhupada's glass. And he's just looking, the bubbles popping up. So then he picks up the can and he starts reading the label. So this was 1973. So he looks at looks at the can, he looks at the writing as ingredients, and he's reading out loud. He goes, carbonated water, sugar, lemon, real lemon juice, he said, or citric acid. He looks at me, he said, this is all natural ingredients. He said, it's very nice. He was like a 7-Up commercial. So then, of course, he grabs his cup, we grab our cups, and he takes his sip. He goes, Prabhupada was delighted with this ice cold 7-Up. He said when he was a boy, he said one of his favorite drinks was the Nimbu Pani. He said you could buy Nimbu Pani for two annas, 2 paisa. He said you could get it. So he liked the lemon lime soda. He liked very much. So that was the first time I had anything outside of the temple since joining 2 years before. And it was my first experience of seeing Prabhupada having something. So then we arrive in New York City, Henry Street Temple. And we get to the temple. Prabhupada, the temple room is on one side, and Prabhupada had he had a flat apartment on the other, right along where the temple room was. So we get in. So Prabhupada goes into his room. I go into his room with him. I have his bags. And the devotee there that greeted us, he comes into the room. And it's very hot. New York summer could be very, very hot. It's like here in Vrindavan, now is 40 degrees, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's a dry heat. So there in New York, you would get 38, 40 degrees, but it'd be very humid. So we go into Prabhupada's rooms there, and it was very dark in there. And the devotee says to me, do you need anything for Prabhupada? So, and generally I could never think of anything Prabhupada needed because he never needed anything. When I was with him, I never found him that he needed things. He was always very satisfied. But something went off in my head. And I said, you can get a 6-pack of 7-Up. So this devotee looked at me like he said, what? I said, you can get a 6-pack of 7-Up. I said, cans, 6-pack of cans of 7-Up. I said, just get it. So later in the day, he brought me this 6-pack of 7-Up. Now there was a small kitchen area with a little mini fridge. So when he brought them to me, I just stuffed them in the fridge. It was like contraband. I was actually a little afraid. I didn't know what to do. I didn't drink them myself, and I didn't know how I could give it to Prabhupada. So a day goes by. So the next day comes, the next evening comes. It's hot, and it's going up into the high 30s, high 90s Fahrenheit. No air conditioning in the rooms. This one devotee, he had traveled to see Srila Prabhupada. He was a temple president down in the South, in the US. And when he went in, I brought him into Prabhupada's room, and he told me not even to go in. I always would go into Prabhupada's room, offer obeisances, and then leave. But he just shut the door on me. He wanted to speak apparently privately to Prabhupada, so he closed the door. So I went back to this little spot and just sat on the floor. So about a half hour goes by. And then this devotee, he comes out of Prabhupada's rooms, he comes to where I'm sitting by the kitchen, and he says, Prabhupada needs water. He said, give me a glass of water. So immediately this thing went off in my head. And I said, I'll bring it to him. So he was very much into having, I think, a private conversation. And he kept saying, give it to me, I'll bring it to him. And I said, no. I said, I have to prepare it, I'll bring it to him. So of course I go into the refrigerator, I get Prabhupada's silver goblet, and I poured a 7-Up, ice cold 7-Up into his goblet instead of water. So then I have the tray, I got the silver cup on the tray, And I go up to Prabhupada's room and I open up the door. As soon as I open the door, again, this devotee's right there staring me down saying, give it to me. And I said, no. I said, I've got it. I said, I got to do it. So he relented. So I walked past him. I walked up to the desk. Prabhupada's sitting behind the desk. And I come and I take the tray and I put it down. And Prabhupada leans forward and at his desk and he looks. He said, what is that? I said, oh, Prabhupada, I said, it's 7-Up. He said, oh. So then Prabhupada's sitting behind his desk, very warm in the room. So of course he gets his cup, he takes it and you can see bubbles coming up and he just takes the 7-Up and he takes a sip. He said, this is very refreshing, he said. So this devotee, of course, he's in the room totally bewildered. Prabhupada's drinking a 7-Up. And then Prabhupada gets up. He grabs his 7-Up and he's just standing there by his asana. And he's just got the 7-Up in his hands and he just starts taking sips. Every now and then, give a little Then he takes a sip and he finished it. In a couple of minutes, he finished the 7-Up. And then he said, okay. So then I looked, I said, would you like any more? He said, no. He said, that's okay. So then I got the tray, I walked past the devotee with a big smile on my face, and I left the room. So now the next morning comes. So after class, Bali-Murdan Prabhu was there. They were looking for a new temple for the devotees because there's so many devotees in New York. So he comes to Prabhupada's rooms and he said, Prabhupada, would you like to come and see this church? He said, we're looking at a church. And I believe it was right, whether it was on Fifth Avenue or anyway, it was right in a very exclusive area. And Prabhupada said, okay. He said, we can go this morning. He said, if you like, we can go now and see it. So Prabhupada said, okay. So 4 of us, it was Kirti Raj driving, Bali-Murdan sat next to him, and Prabhupada and I are in the back of this little Toyota car. It was a small 4-door Toyota, no air conditioning. So we drive. I didn't know New York City very well, but we drive for 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes. And we pull across the street from this beautiful cathedral, Catholic church cathedral, big, V-shaped roof. And it was incredible, huge. And we're right across the street. So Bali opens the door, we all get out. He opens Prabhupada's door, Prabhupada gets out. And so we're on the sidewalk. So Prabhupada's ready to go over to see this place. And then Bali-Murdan says, well, Prabhupada, we can't really go in there. He said, we don't want them to know that we're Hare Krishnas and we're looking at this place. So Prabhupada said, all right. But he said, I wanted you to see what it looked like. And Prabhupada's just looking. And you could see into the front doors. And of course, if you're familiar with Catholic churches, big cathedral-like churches built in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was beautiful, stained glass windows, big chandeliers hanging along. So Prabhupada could see inside there all the pews. And he said, we can call this Gauranga Hall. He was already naming the hall. He said, we can call this Gauranga Hall. So we were there for a few minutes. Bali talked with him. And then he said, well, okay, we can go back to the temple. So of course, Prabhupada knew New York City. Prabhupada, first place he went, New York City. Yeah, he spent over a year there. So Prabhupada turns around and there's a little mom and pop grocery store right on the corner. Just a little grocer, local grocer. So Prabhupada looks and he looks at Kirti Raj and he said, do they have 7 o'clock? And he goes, what? And I look at Kirti, I said, 7-Up. I said, Prabhupada wants a 7-Up. And he's still going, what? I said, go get a 7-Up. So he goes into the store. Of course, we're all in dhoti, kurta, shaved heads, tilak. He goes into the store, he comes out with 1 can of 7-Up. So Prabhupada's standing there in his bright saffron cloth, just kurta, dhoti, has his cane in his left hand. So I take the 7-Up, of course, I open the can, it's ice cold 7-Up. And Prabhupada's standing there on the corner across the street from the cathedral. He's got his cane planted in the ground and he's got this 7-Up and he just starts drinking up. And of course, we're all watching in amazement just to see Prabhupada. Everyone's drinking 7-Up, but to see Prabhupada drinking 7-Up, that was ecstatic. That was ecstasy. So he's stayed there for a few minutes, took a sip, took another sip, took another sip. Then he looks at us, he said, okay, now we can go. So then we go back and sit in the car. I'm in the back seat with Prabhupada. So we close the doors. Kirti Raj starts driving. Prabhupada takes another sip. Then he gets the can and he goes over. He said, okay, now you can have. So of course, as he's handing the can to me, the two in the front are reaching back. Everyone wants Prabhupada's Maha 7-Up. So we finished the 7-Up. And that was the last 7-Up that Prabhupada had in New York at that time. So a few days later, Prabhupada goes to Los Angeles, and New Dwarka Temple. Of course, New Dwarka now is, again, this was summer of 73. It was right after that Prabhupada stayed some time there in New Dwarka. So when we get there, Kurandar was there, Kurandar Prabhu, the GBC, the person in charge of everything, one of Prabhupada's most recognized devotees. Prabhupada once told me, he said, Kurandar can do anything. He said he was capable of doing anything. He said that once when Prabhupada went down his stairs from his room, he went down the hallway, and he was walking into his garden. And as he opened the back door, I opened the back door for Prabhupada, he went down one step, and then it was a footpath to the garden. So when he went down the step, he looked at me. He said, you see this step? I said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, Kurandar made that step. He said, Kurandar can do anything. So Kurandar, Prabhupada regarded Kurandar, if he needed something done, Kurandar could do it. So we arrive in Los Angeles, all the devotees at the airport, we get back to the temple, we go up to Prabhupada's room, we all go into Prabhupada's room, Kurandar's there, I have Prabhupada's bag, Prabhupada goes and sits down behind his desk, and Kurandar looks at Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, he said, all the grahastas now in their apartments, they all have cases of 7-Up. They heard that you're drinking 7-Up. So within days, it went all around the world. Prabhupada had a 7-Up. And he said, oh no. Prabhupada said, that's not good. He said, sometimes I'll drink a little 7-Up. He said, for digestion. He said, but it's not good that everyone is drinking this 7-Up, he said. So that became the word. Prabhupada said, no 7-Up. Of course, he had a tendency, whenever he was on the airplane, he would always invite all the devotees. Whoever was on the airplane, sometimes on short flights, devotees would travel along with Prabhupada. And he would always say, can have 7-Ups. We would all have 7-Ups, a round of 7-Ups by Prabhupada's mercy. So that was the 7-Up saga. That was the beginning of 7-Up in ISKCON.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Do you have some questions? What?
Please, Prabhu, what is the best way to please Srila Prabhupada in your eyes?
The best way to please Srila Prabhupada in my eyes. Okay. My eyes is all I can do is, I know 3 different times, different devotees asked Prabhupada how they could please him the most. And it's a very personal thing, depending on who asked him. Each answer was different. One devotee, big book distributor, asked Prabhupada, expecting to hear something very certain, what Prabhupada would say. And Prabhupada said, just develop your love of Krishna. When Madhvisa asked Prabhupada how to please him the most, Prabhupada said, you struggle for Krishna. In my eyes, is what I see please Srila Prabhupada. He took for granted that we are chanting our rounds, following the principles, doing the routine program. That was expected. He didn't expect that he had to every day tell us these things to please him. But what I saw that really pleased him is, as he said to Madhvisa, we do something for him. As when people would come to his room, he said, what are you doing? He didn't say, how is your chanting going? How's your consciousness? He would say, what have you done? What are you doing for Krishna? Prabhupada's society, very much a preaching society, preaching mission. So he liked to know somehow or other that we were serving that mission, that we were helping in the preaching mission. And of course, it doesn't just mean giving classes or distributing books. It could be worshiping the deities, like the twins in Mayapur. They've been there their whole lives. This is what's pleasing to Srila Prabhupada, that we take up this mission seriously and do something. I was saying how, back in those days, we were in a sense, we were all very much quarantined by our service. It's all we knew was to do our service, nothing else. We didn't take time for our sense gratification. Like I say, there was no TV, no Netflix, no movies, no internet to spend our day on. It was just our service. And we could understand it was pleasing to Prabhupada. Because you'll know if you please Prabhupada, because if you please him, you'll feel satisfaction. Prabhupada would use that example, when you'll know you're full. When you eat, you feel satisfaction when you're full. So if we're engaged in service, we can feel satisfaction because we know this is what pleases Prabhupada. Prabhupada was sometimes say that easygoing life and Krishna consciousness, they don't go together. I told you when I was with Prabhupada, whether I was a grahasta, I was with him, I said 2.5 years. Half of that time I was married. I had a wife and a child that I didn't see. But Prabhupada never would say to me, you want to take some time off to be with your family? He was very content that I was there doing my service. He expected us to do the needful. And at the time, of course, while Prabhupada was with us for a short time, he wanted to extract as much service out of us as he could. And that was his mercy. To this day, I see that he was very kind that he allowed me to be engaged in service all the time. And when I was grahasta, there were 2 times when ex-sannyasis had approached Prabhupada, who were now married with a wife and a child. And they would feel shame coming before Prabhupada. And each time I was present in the room, and Prabhupada said the same thing. He said, now you're grahasta, like SrutaKirti. He said, so you just go on with your service. But what I could understand from that, it was not just that I was a grahasta, do your service. He had a grahasta, just like myself, Pradyumna, Shyamasundar, and others. We traveled with Prabhupada. We were separate from our wives, our children, from our families. And he didn't look at us as being any different than the sannyasis that were traveling with him, or if a brahmachari was traveling with him. He saw us all as his personal servants. One other thing there in Australia, and it was right there in Perth, Australia. He was a brahmachari, and it was his parents who owned a home that allowed us to stay there. So as I told you, this was a beach house, and there was a pool right there on the property, which for us Westerners, you see a swimming pool, you're very eager to use it whenever you can. And Prabhupada, after his massage, he would go in the pool and he would bathe in the pool. So one afternoon while Prabhupada was taking rest, I went into the pool and I was swimming around, doing laps in the pool, having a good time. So while I was doing that, of course, again, should I wait?
Yeah, 1 second. 1 second.
We're just waiting for one connection, I think. I'll go on.
Yes.
So while I was doing laps in the pool, of course, at those moments, if I wasn't there, you knew Prabhupada was going to ring the bell. So he's ringing the bell. He's ringing the bell. And of course, I'm in the pool, so I don't hear any bells ringing. He's ringing the bell. So finally, the brahmachari boy, he goes into the room and he offers obeisances. And Prabhupada says, I've been ringing this bell and ringing the bell. No one's coming. And the devotee said, it was Ganesh, Prabhupada, your servant, swimming in the pool. And Prabhupada looked at him. He said, you're all my servants. He said, don't say he's swimming. He said, you're also servant. So this is all of us. Is all any of us are is Prabhupada's personal servant. Last time when I spoke. But it's a fact. So the more we can understand that, and if we live like that, you can experience being Prabhupada's personal servant, having a personal relationship with Prabhupada. It's there for every one of us. You just have to grab it and do something. Do something, as Prabhupada would say, do the needful. Okay. Have any other questions here?
No, not
You
that
go?
I see.
Any other questions, Prabhu, or we can meet again tomorrow evening at same time?
Yes, Prabhuji. I think we're getting late and we don't want to hold you. There are one or two raised hands, but we'll do it tomorrow, Prabhuji. So we are very thankful to you, Prabhuji, that you gave us again your association, and so wonderful to hear from you.
Pleasure. So everyone, tomorrow night, the same time, it's India time, 7:30 p.m. Please come and attend. If you have some questions, you can send them. You can send them to me in advance. In the meantime, we can speak on different topics if you like. We're available. We're here. These devotees have their Zoom, but we're on SrutaKirti Vishaka, where you can find my Facebook page, SrutaKirti Fiorentino, and we can do it in that way as well. So thank you all very much. Don't worry, quarantine. This is Krishna's kindness upon us. We have an opportunity to go deeper into Krishna consciousness without so many distractions. There's no difficulty. Prabhupada told one devotee, 1969, in a letter, he said that Krishna does not like to see his devotees suffering. He doesn't like to see his devotees in anxiety. He said, so he'll make all endeavors to see that we're not suffering in anxiety. He said, one should not be in anxiety. You shouldn't be feared. You shouldn't be in any fear. Devotee means fearless. Whatever condition we're in, it's by Krishna's grace. So I'll thank you all very much. Thank you, Prabhu, for organizing this class again. And we'll see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much. Hare
Krishna.
How do I stop?
Okay.
Ronnie, you can end the meeting. We'll end it, Mother.
Yes.
Ronnie,
Should I end it?
Yes, please end the meeting.
Okay.